Hi, and welcome to this presentation on general functional concepts in Alma. My name is Carrie Bartels, and I'm a trainer with Ex Libris in North America. This presentation is copyrighted and is the confidential property of Ex Libris Limited. Information included in this presentation is periodically reviewed and updated. You may share these training materials within your institution, but not beyond. Today we'll be covering some basic concepts that you'll see throughout Alma. So we'll talk about the data model, or in other words, the data structure for material types, and those would be for physical, electronic, and digital materials, as well as some general workflow concepts that will help as you view the more detailed workflow sessions later on. We do strongly encourage that prior to this session, you view the Introduction to Alma session, which covers the Alma framework as well as the deployment model. We'll be building on the Introduction to Alma session in this session. The key objectives for this session are to be able to have a high-level understanding of the data model for catalogs, inventories, and user records, and also have a general understanding of workflow life cycles. So in other words, what a workflow is in Alma terms and the reasoning behind workflow design in Alma. So let's look first at data structures. The Alma data model has two basic zones. First of all, the data services zone, in other words called the community zone, and the institution zone that has your own catalog and inventory. Within the community zone, there are three pieces. First of all, global authorities, and that's where the vocabularies and name authority files are kept, and Ex Libris keeps these up to date on your behalf. We have the community catalog, and that's currently comprised of mostly electronic resources, but it also could contain shared bibliographic records, and this is managed by Ex Libris as well. And then we have the central knowledge base, and that contains administrative and connection information for electronic resources, which you would activate for your own local institution in your institution zone. So in your institution zone, we have your institutional catalog for bibliographic records as well as your inventory. And the inventory is important to our model because it defines what is yours. It defines those titles that are managed by your environment, regardless of where the bibliographic record resides. So let's talk now about the interactions between your institution zone and the community zone. If you acquire a resource and want to import the bibliographic record into your catalog, you can do that and then hang inventory off that record. So in this example here, we have the title, The Trial. We've imported the bibliographic record into our institution zone, and then we can hang inventory, so in other words, holdings or item records off of that. You can also use a record directly from the community zone. So what you would do is go to the community zone, search for the record, and then hang inventory off that for print or electronic inventory. Though, again, at this point, what's available in the community zone are mostly records for electronic resources. But in this example here, we have the title Collapse. We found the record, the bibliographic record in the community catalog for Collapse, and then we're able to hang our inventory off of that record. If we were to acquire an electronic package and wanted to manage the package level in your own inventory, Alma will link out to the titles that exist within that package based on data from the central knowledge base. So you can manage, order, and pay at the package level, but get all of the constituent titles for that package from the central knowledge base. So in this case, with Academic Search Premier, we're managing that as our own inventory, but we're able to grab the packages that exist, or the titles that exist for the package from the central knowledge base. Lastly, just again, a word on global authorities. They can be used to authorize your institution zone records. And they're always used to authorize the community zone records. So although they are authorities in a global environment, you can use them to authorize your local institutional catalog records. Though it's not illustrated here, one option if you need vocabularies that are not currently in the community zone is you can have your own local authorities as well. And if this is applicable to your institution, talk to your project team about getting this set up. It's important to have a good understanding of what we mean when we talk about the inventory model. And the first most important thing to know is that although there is a fairly consistent structure between the resource formats, there is a distinct inventory model for physical, electronic, and digital resources. And in all of these cases, we start off with what's called the MMS record. MMS stands for Metadata Management System. And this is essentially the bibliographic record. And the bibliographic record can reside in the institution zone, using the abbreviation IZ here. It can exist in the network zone, and that would be in the case of consortia. Or that bibliographic record can exist in the community zone, using the abbreviation CZ here. We then have what's called an intellectual entity, and you'll sometimes see the abbreviation IE for this. The intellectual entity is essentially transparent. You can't see it. What it does is it points or links to the correct bibliographic record, so that that bibliographic record will link then to this middle level, or in other words, the holdings, for example. So it's just a linking mechanism. It's mostly a technical solution that you really won't need to worry about because it is behind the scenes. The middle level, this groups together the items that you manage. So for physical resources, you use holdings records. For electronic resources, we use what are called services, and this would be, for example, full text services. And for digital resources, we use what's called a representation. The actual items that you manage that define usage, that define access, are at the most detailed level, and this is called the item level. So for physical resources, this is an item. For electronic resources, we call it a portfolio. And for digital resources, it's a file, or in other words, the digitized file. So what we're going to do is look at each of these resource formats separately. For physical inventory, it consists of the bibliographic record. This could be MARC or Dublin Core, which links to an intellectual entity behind the scenes. Again, you won't see that intellectual entity. It'll just look like a MARC record pointing directly to a holdings record. You might have a bibliographic record called War and Peace. So using this example here, which points to using the intellectual entity holdings records. And for each unique location, you're going to have a holdings record. So for the main stacks, we have a holdings record, and we also have a holdings record for offsite storage for that location. These group together a total of 3 copies. 2 copies are in the main stacks, and 1 copy is in the offsite storage location. For each location, these copies are considered interchangeable. And for fulfillment purposes, unless there are archival copies, these copies are considered interchangeable for each location. So within the holdings location for main stacks, we have 2 items. These are considered interchangeable. When the patron requests it, they'll just see this title. It won't matter which item because in the case of the main stacks here where we have multiple copies, these are considered interchangeable. For serials, we'll use the example of the serial called tri-quarterly. And again, intellectual entity behind the scenes links the bib record to holdings. For each distinct run, you're going to have a holdings record. Now, unlike with monographs, where you have 1 holdings per location, with serials, you might have another holdings if you have an order for a duplicate copy of the serial. So if I had 2 copies of issue 4, 2 copies of issue 5, and 2 copies of issue 6, I'd have 2 periodical holdings records, even though they're at the same location, with a single run under 1 holding and a single run under the other holding. So in this case, unlike with monographs that we just looked at, each serials item is not interchangeable. And they described this as a distinct managed item. So issue 4, issue 5, issue 6, or a bound collection of items, a run of 1998, for example, as 1 item. The point is that each item within serials is not considered interchangeable. For electronic inventory, it's a slightly more elaborate inventory model. But at the top, as usual, we have our MMS, or in other words, our bibliographic record, which the intellectual entity hooks to, and then we have the service. Now in Alma terms, the service is always full text. The service level allows us to link the package to the actual title that resides within the package. And that's why you have a parallel service and package service. You'll see those here in parallel. The service indicates that the specific title is full text, while the package service indicates that the package is full text, the entire package. Lastly, we have the portfolio here, and that gives specific date coverage for each title that's in the package. The package groups together titles that are on a common platform, and you can use either packages or titles to anchor workflows. You'll search in the central knowledge base for packages you want to activate or a specific title within a package that you want to activate. And then having these parallel services here, the package service and the service, that allows you to have some flexibility in activation. So you can activate the entire package, or you can just activate a single title within that package. The package and the package list can be copied from the central knowledge base, or in other words, linked from the central knowledge base to your institution zone. And it will continue to link to the central knowledge base, or CKB record, so that if there's an update, you'll automatically have the update in your local institution zone. And this is true whether you're working with an entire package as a whole, as in an aggregator package, or selecting specific titles from a package as in a selective package. Just to get a little bit more concrete, let's say we've acquired the electronic title Adult Learning. And so we see the MARC record for that. The title is available through two packages, Sage Complete and Academic Search Premier. And what this data model looks like is that the MARC record representing the title hooks to an intellectual entity behind the scenes, and that connects us to a service. We have the Sage full text service and the Academic Search Premier full text service. So this means that we have full text access to this title, Adult Learning. Similarly, each package itself has a package service that runs parallel to indicate that the entire package as a whole has full text. So Sage Complete has full text for that entire package, as does Academic Search Premier, offers full text for the entire package. When you look at the actual title, this would actually be considered the portfolio level. And this is also where coverage dates are stored. So you can think of portfolio as being analogous to an electronic holdings. So in this case, the title Adult Learning resides in the package Sage Complete. And within that package, the title is covered from 2002 to 2013. The same title, Adult Learning, is also covered in the Academic Search Premier package, and those coverage dates are from 1997 to 2011 for that specific title. Let's look now at digital inventory. And digital inventory is similar to print inventory in terms of the hierarchical structure. So once again, we have the bibliographic record up at the top. We have the intellectual entity that links the bibliographic record ultimately to the holdings in a physical example. But in the digital inventory example, it hooks to what we call a representation. And a representation bundles together files. So we have a MARC record, in this case for a thesis, and it has an intellectual entity behind the scenes that links us to two different representations. The first representation is the preservation master representation, and that consists of 71, as we see here, TIFF files. And these would be preservation quality scans of each page of the thesis. The second representation, the presentation derivative, is the accessible downloadable version. It's what users will find in Primo, and it consists of a single file, full.pdf. For digital inventory, it's important to know that while digital functionality is available in Alma, it's being built out further in the next year or so, so look for those updates to come. So now, let's talk about the publishing model. Once we create these bibliographic records in inventory, how do they become available to users in Primo? There's a publishing job in Alma that will publish records to Primo. And when you're publishing, what Alma does is looks to see what titles are attached to inventory items. So this would be for print, electronic, and digital items. For the initial load, we would publish a full inventory. And this would be all of the bibliographic records attached to your inventory. And these would be whether the bibliographic records are in the community zone or the institution zone, either one. If they're attached to your inventory, they'll be published to Primo. Going forward then, on an ongoing basis, any changed records, either at the bibliographic record level or the inventory level, will be flagged to be republished to Primo. So maybe you've added new titles or removed titles, or you've updated records. Those changed records will be flagged to be republished to Primo. You'll learn more about the inventory model in the resource management series. So let's shift gears for a moment and talk about user records and how user records are structured. Each user record is composed of one core segment, and that core segment includes unique information, such as the user's name, their birth date, the expiration date of the user record, and then perhaps a purge date where the record is completely purged from Alma, as well as the username. Additionally, each user record has a variety of repeatable segments. Each segment is self-contained, and so for example here we have address, we have phone number, we have email address. Each of those contact information segments, for each of them, if there are multiple addresses, for instance, multiple phone numbers, multiple email addresses, we mark one of those as preferred when sending notifications. So if the user has multiple addresses, we mark which address is considered the preferred address. If the user has multiple phone numbers, we mark which one is preferred, and same thing with email address. Each segment also has an owner, which brings us to the notion of data ownership. So let's take an example in which a student information system, such as Banner or PeopleSoft or Workday, creates a user record in Alma as a result of a load. And this is a typical user record that contains one core segment and one each of address, match ID, and phone number. So in other words, in this user record, there's one address, there's one phone number, and there's one match ID. And the match ID will match the user between the student information system and Alma. A staff member, let's say, discovers that the phone number is incorrect, and that staff member tries to update it in Alma. That update will actually be prevented. As far as staff operators are concerned, data owned by Banner is read-only. However, the staff member can create an entirely new phone segment owned by Alma that can be updated and overwritten manually, but not ever overwritten by Banner. And in this case, staff would mark the new phone number as preferred. You'll learn more about user records in the upcoming user management sessions. So let's turn our attention next to some general workflow concepts. And in particular, before we go any further, let's define what we mean when we talk about workflows. The typical workflow definition is a series of steps you engage in to complete an end-to-end process. In Alma terms, we mean something just slightly different. We mean system-managed workflows. It's not a series of steps that you engage in. It's a series of steps that Alma manages. And different staff members might engage in different parts or tasks of the workflow. So you yourself may not be performing every single task that's in the workflow. So let's look at an example, and we're going to be using the request process here. A user finds something in the discovery interface, in other words, Primo, which points back to Alma. So Alma might find materials from either your local collection or perhaps a remote collection. It finds that the item is on the shelf, and you've set up your policies so that a patron can request that the item be routed to a requested pickup location. So Alma, finding that the item fits the request or works for the request, will automatically create a series of steps for the request, and this would be considered a physical item request. So step 1, pick up the item from the shelf. Step 2, once the item's been scanned in from the shelf at the circulation desk, route it to the pickup location. Step 3, place on the hold shelf. Step 4, notify the patron that the item is available. And then step 5, loan it to the patron when they come to pick it up. So it's a sequence of steps. Alma will sit on each step until it's performed, and it will then expect the next step in the series. As each step is performed, Alma will track it and log it. So So this is a known workflow in Alma. Now, what happens if the item is not on the shelf? What if it's on loan to another patron? In legacy systems, you'd need to place an entirely different kind of request for that scenario. In Alma, though, it's a branch of the same physical item request workflow that we just did. It just creates a different step, but it's all within the same workflow. So here's an example of that workflow. Step 1, recall the item. Step 2, identify on return. So the item is recalled. The user maybe has a week to return it. They return it to the library. It gets checked in when it's been returned, and the system says it's on hold to the next patron. So it's routed to the hold shelf at the pickup location. We place it on the hold shelf and notify the patron that it's available for pickup, and then we loan it to the patron when they come in to check it or to borrow the item or to check it out. So notice that these last 3 steps are the same. It's just the first 2 that are a little bit different. So again, it's a branch of the same workflow. It just is a different step or steps. But again, it's all in the same workflow. So instead of having discrete individual actions, what we do is we collect all of the possible actions into a decision tree, and that's what we call a workflow. This is a typical workflow, and this particular workflow is for invoicing. And there's admittedly a lot of information on the slide, but that's because it does encompass a lot of work. The gear icons that you see here, those represent steps that are automated. And then we have little document icons here, and those indicate tasks. Tasks require human mediation or decision making. The system will handle a lot of work in this workflow based on rules that you define. And for those cases that require manual handling, like in the review stage, for instance, you go to a task list to review the exceptions. And while this may seem a little bit confusing initially, what's happening is that the entire invoicing workflow is being handled in, at most, 2 steps. Other than that, everything happens automatically. So let's clean this up just to get a little more typical workflow. Here we've highlighted the automated default path. So an invoice comes in via EDI. It passes all the checks without needing any review. All of these steps then are processed with no errors, and then it's sent to the ERP for payment, all without intervention. If intervention is needed, it's only to correct a problem, and then the invoice goes back on its way. Workflows allow us to treat automation as the default. Now, because we have a workflow or life cycle set up in Alma, we can go from import to payment, the last step in the process, with 0 intervention. Although we can put a few checks in place, such as the review stage, for instance. Or maybe it needs approval, and that approval needs to happen automatically. So manual approval here. Instead of needing to understand the complete end-to-end workflow, you just need to know that if there's a problem, this is where you go to fix it, the review area, for instance. Or if you decide to implement manual approval, this is where you'd go to fix it. So instead of having to do each step manually, you can focus on the problem solving of the steps that actually require intellectual human decision making. Many current workflows in the library are very staff-centric. So that is, one workflow may involve a lot of different resources and a lot of different tasks. But existing systems tend to treat these workflows as something performed by the same staff member. So this is an example of a reading list workflow, or in other words, course reserves workflow. So what we get when we rely on the same staff member to do all of these different steps is we get a situation like this. One staff member is responsible for managing the reading list, fetching the items from the shelf, physically processing each item, and then moving it to the course reserves area, and then also digitizing and managing digital objects. The virtue of having each individual step be part of a larger managed workflow is that no single staff member needs to own the entire task or the entire workflow. So this prevents a bottleneck. So in this example, the staff member is only managing the reading list itself, while treating any inventory management tasks as tasks to be assigned to other staff. So one person manages the reading list, maybe another person is responsible for selection and ordering if something needs to be ordered for course reserves. Another staff member might be responsible for moving the item and routing it to the course reserves location. So just to recap, the advantages of system-managed workflows are, first of all, it allows for overall automation where staff intervention is not needed. It focuses staff on the activities that require human mediation in making decisions. It allows for precise monitoring of stages in end-to-end workflows, and it allows for allocating staff to the steps where bottlenecks are occurring. So maybe digitization, for example, might be where a bottleneck is occurring. So we can actually allocate staff to that particular task, rather than allocating staff to the general workflow itself, such as, in this case, course reserves. In other words, the ALMA model allows you to focus on the tasks rather than focusing on the entire end-to-end workflow. This brings us to the end of our session. So just to briefly summarize, in this session we covered data model concepts for catalogs and inventory, including the distinct inventory models for physical, electronic, and digital inventory, as well as the user data model and user data ownership. And we also looked at what workflows are in general, and then provided some background on the way we designed workflows and the reasoning behind that. This concludes the orientation and concepts segment of the training, and now that we've covered the background concepts, from here you'll be moving into the more functional details. Thanks for viewing this session.